A lot of the toxic parents that I'm talking about are toxic spouses, right? One thing that I've learned from, or certainly became more clear to me from recent posts that I've done, is how the toxic parent often uses the children, right? We know this. This is not something that we didn't know. But the toxic parent will often use the toxic child. The toxic parent will often use the children, right, as a way to carry on with their toxicity, and they become the pawns in the puzzle. So I know there are lots of parents who don't get to see their children because their spouse, they manage to get free from that kind of abusive relationship, and then the spouse keeps them from seeing the children. Trust me, I know more about that than you probably could imagine. I finally cut ties yesterday with my parents and have been working on that for a while now, thanks to your videos. Oh, that's good to read. Good to read. And power to you. You know, somebody said to me, and I'm going to try and keep up as much as I can here in the comments. So somebody said to me, one of the reels that I make from these lives, because I record them, somebody said to me on there, they were commenting loads and loads, right? By the way, loads of red flags about them being toxic, which I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things that they said on there is like, okay, well, you shouldn't be celebrating these people, right? Because I always say, look, anybody that follows my stuff knows that I never really give any advice on what you should do if you've got a toxic parent. I just hold space as best as I can in the knowing of how difficult the situation is, and respect, validate, and hold space for the people that have had to cut parents because they've had no other choice, right? It's very different from me pushing people to cut their parents or saying you should cut them. I just recognize that there is a large group of people, larger than society, whatever that is, would want us to believe, who have had to do that and get no understanding and no validation whatsoever. And so this lady was saying to me, so when I kind of explained that in the comments, because I try and interact in the comments, right? I want to try and learn as much as I can. One thing that I'm really keen to try and learn is why people are so uncomfortable with this idea, right? A lot of it's because toxic, never underestimate how many toxic people will show up on a post about toxic people, right? But I do want to learn why they are and see if I can compassionately learn rather than just assuming that everybody that goes against it is a bad person, right? But this one lady said to me, well, even if you aren't promoting it, you shouldn't celebrate it. And I was like, whoa, so you actually believe that we shouldn't celebrate somebody escaping an abusive and toxic relationship? That's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. And I will continue to celebrate it. And what I mean by celebrate it is celebrate that somebody has been able to put themselves first with a knowing that there's no easy situation here. For most people, you don't just leave and then everything's fine and dandy. I've met loads of people through this stuff, right, that do reach a place where they finally get some freedom. But I also recognize that it doesn't, this is like a lesser of horrible evils for these people. And, it's just crazy to me. It's crazy, crazy, crazy to me. The lengths that people will go to protect abuse from a parent. To protect abuse from a parent. And one of the massive things that's really, really interesting to me is that, so one of the posts went viral this week, right? So it's had like 6 million views on it, right? And in the video, all I say is, well, not all I say, but what I say is, the main body of the video is these people have tried everything to hang on to a shoestring of a relationship. They've done everything they can to try and stay in this relationship, and they're left with no other option. And the only thing that they can do is cut ties with that shoestring, right? That's what I say in the video. The amount of people that comment on there and say, this should be a last resort. And I'm like, yeah, that's what the fucking video says. The video says, that's what I'm holding space for. And if your first thought when somebody has cut a parent, particularly if it's somebody that if they say to you, you know them, they're a good person, you spent time with them, you recognize that they're a good person. If your first response when they say, look, I don't have a relationship with my parent, I've had to cut ties there. If your first response is to start listing all the things that they should have tried before they do that, then you're the one with the problem, not them. You're the one that is incapable of having enough self-awareness and ability to self-reflect, right? on people's experiences if you're going straight in, well, you know, should you try this? And, you know, you only get one mum and dad and all that. If you go straight there, like, especially with a person that you know is a good person, if you go straight there, it's you that has a problem. It's you that needs to do some work, and it's you that lacks self-awareness. And I am going to come back to these questions in a minute. Something that really annoys me, and I had a few of these comments as well, is not just when people, so that whole devaluing the experience is one thing, right? It's like, you know, have you tried this? Like, fuck me, yeah. Oh, maybe I should try speaking with them. Like, you haven't done that throughout the God knows how many years you've been trying to do that. Oh, why didn't I think of speaking to them about it, right? Why didn't I think of, like, letting a few things go and all that, right? All that stuff's crap. What makes some comments even worse, what frustrates me even more, is when people sit on this fucking spiritual, and I'm going to swear when I say it, fucking spiritual high top, right? One person said to me, no one's willing to do the proper healing work. No one's willing to do the healing work needed to be able to move past this. Move past what? Fucking abuse. What? Healing? If you heal enough, you'll be able to stay in a relationship where somebody abused you. That doesn't make, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And what that is, by the way, is somebody who's spiritual bypassing and using their spiritualness, and I love everybody and I give everybody a chance, and everybody's like they are for a reason. Well, good for you. Good for you. But that's not how life works. Not in my experience. And again, like I always say, I say this to somebody who's not, I don't have toxic parents in my life, right? That's not where I'm at. So people need to kind of understand that for a start. So that's important. Another thing that I wanted to just touch on is, like, people often talk about, like, why you say toxic. People say to me, why do you say toxic? Why don't you just say abusive? And I'm like, listen, if terminology is your problem here, then you don't know what we're talking about, right? Because I've never met anybody, right? How helpful is it to somebody who says, after everything I've tried over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it's been, after everything I've tried, I've had to cut ties with a toxic parent. If your reaction is, are you sure they're toxic? Because if it's abuse, you should say abuse, right? If that's your reaction, then you're an idiot as well. And, like, that's the truth, right? Unhealthy, like, I think people should use whatever terminology they want. What I do find on social media is that whatever terminology you use, you'll upset someone. So you say they're narcissistic, and people say narcissistic is a personality disorder. No one does it because they're narcissistic. I'll say, all right, well, then they're toxic then. Well, what do you mean toxic? Do you mean toxic or abusive? All right, they're abusive then. What, physical or sexual? Well, no, it's emotional. Well, what do you mean? Like, abuse is abuse is abuse. And that's another thing that frustrates the hell out of me. When people devalue emotional abuse, like it's somehow acceptable. Whatever word works for you. Exactly. Allow people to lead with the language that they want to use. That's really important, yeah? And just to come back to sort of put a full stop on that bit that I said earlier, if somebody comes to you and says, and it's somebody you know, love and respect, and they say, I've had to cut ties with a parent, if you think, my duty here is to make sure that they've tried every single angle, nah. Your duty is to metaphorically hold their hand and let them share with you what they want to share with you. If that's not, then you're the problem. Frankly, I champion however you say it. Just the fact it's being spoken about is so good. Exactly. But by the way, this terminology thing shows up everywhere. I do a lot in the addiction space, and then so people get upset with certain words in addiction, and people get set, and then it goes. People say to me, "Wow, you're saying they're toxic? Who gets to decide whether it's toxic or not?" And I say, well, the fucking victim for a start. Let's start there, right? And if they're saying it's toxic, that's their experience. They're experiencing toxicity. And then people throw at me, wait till you have kids. And I'll say, I've got 6. Well, wait till they get to their adults. I say, well, one of them basically is. 2 of them nearly. Okay, let me try and do some questions here. There's lots going on in the comments. I'll get lost. There's no moves in past if you have got toxic people around you. It takes balls to cut ties. Let's be really clear about, like, abuse as well, right? Because this is another thing that those spiritually enlightened people will tell you. that you are the beholder, that abuse only happens if you let it happen, right? Particularly emotional abuse. If you can get to this place where you're unabusable and they cut that, nah. Particularly, by the way, when it's a parent and there is this kind of connection that happens on a bit of a sort of deeper level, abuse doesn't just go away. You don't just like lay boundaries. One person was saying like, well, it doesn't matter how emotionally abusive they are, unless it's physical or sexual abuse, you should be trying to call them at least 4 times a year. That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. And the person that was saying that had their own problems anyway. So here's a few things. How do you spot? There's a couple of like key ways of spotting a toxic person. I'm going to call them a toxic person. You can call them whatever you want. Call them a moron if you want, or a horrible person. Whatever words work for you, call them that. But I'll tell you a few ways of spotting them. When they comment on social media posts about toxic people, they comment loads, and when they do comment, it's never just answering your questions or listening and reflecting back on what you said. They're massive long messages, a bit like a toxic person's text message, yeah? You know, when it comes through and it's just like bam, and you're reading it and you're like, oh my God, this is like bringing up stuff from 7 years. Like, why is that even in there? And then it bamboozles you. Key way to spot a toxic person, especially through 2 types of toxic messages from a toxic person. And people say I overuse the word toxic, and it sounds like they might be right. But two ways of spotting a toxic person in their text message. You've had some kind of falling out with them and not heard from them a while and not spoke to them for a while, right? And the last time that you parted ways, they were really like unequivocally horrible to you, right? And it was clear and obvious that they said some horrible things, and everybody, all parties know that. And then 3 months later, they just text out of the blue something really nice, you know, probably 1 or 2 sentences, to try and tug at your heartstrings. It means you can't show it to anyone without anyone going, oh, they're trying to reach out, right? And they fucking know what they're doing, right? And then the second text message, if you were to respond to that first text message, or if you've called them out on something, or even just put your needs forward, you're going to get that bam long text message. It's going to be full of riddles and bringing up old stuff and trying to tie you in knots and God knows what else. Okay, this is a common question. How do you get rid of the guilt after cutting a toxic parent? I think the truthful answer is that it's potentially not something that you just get rid of, right? So, like, you're going to have to go on another journey if you find yourself in a place where you've gone no contact or you've had to cut ties. Excuse me. You're going to have to find yourself on another journey with this, right? And it's going to be a different type of journey, and it's one where you're not going to constantly keep getting clawed back. Well, they will still text you out of the blue or send birthday cards and all that sort of crap. But guilt would imply that you've done something wrong. So one of the good ways of tackling it is to look at all of the reasons that you've done it and how you've put yourself first and how you haven't actually done anything wrong. And what you'll find is that a lot of what you're feeling is shame. Shame, the deep-rooted idea that there's something wrong with you. And that's not a mistake. If you've grown up with a toxic parent, then shame will be the weapon that they use to try and keep control of you, particularly whenever you express anything to do with your needs. They're going to shame you for that. They're going to call you needy. They're going to say, like, how dare you do that after everything I've done for you, and all of those things, yeah. So they're going to have, like, used shame a lot, and they'll use it when you cut ties, and it will be installed in you. And again, let's say shame is the deep-rooted idea that there's something wrong with you. So that will begin to mean that you think there's parts of yourselves that you can't share with anybody. The problem is that you exist in a society where if you try and talk to anybody about what you're experiencing, having cut ties with a toxic parent, right, is they're going to further compound the shame because they're not going to validate you. They're not going to think, here's this well-rounded, decent person that I know that sat in front of me that said they've had to cut ties with a toxic parent. Wow. I mean, some shit must have gone down for this to happen. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put my biases to one side for a moment. I'm going to stop worrying about my own level of toxicity that might exist, right? I'm going to stop pushing my own want and need for love from my own parents away for the second. I'm going to listen to the fucking person that's talking to me. When you do that, then you can actually start to hear and validate somebody's experience. If you don't do that, right, and you do the opposite, then you're the one with the problem. And it's similar to, like, the amount of people that have seen the latest reel that's gone big, talking about toxic parents, the amount of people that comment on there that are like suggesting that they've never experienced anything like this before in their life, but they just want to jump on there to be righteous and say, I don't like this space, and the fucking kids of today don't even know they were born. Well, hang on a minute. Something about this post made you stop, and I don't believe it's just because you think you're a righteous and good person. So what is it? What is it about it? And I think there's a number of different reasons for that. Let me catch up with these. Sorry, the chats. There's so many people in here. It's hard to keep up. Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate it. I've cut ties with my toxic mother. However, she still has a relationship with my young adult children. They love her very much, but I feel conflicted about this. How do I manage this? Yeah, that's a really difficult situation, right? Because what the toxic parent's going to do is they're going to play that same act that they've played with seemingly most other people outside of the home in their life, which is make themselves really likable and make themselves lovable, and probably even love your children, so their grandchildren, even more, as a way of kind of getting at you. So that's going to be difficult. What I would say is that you need to make the decision that's right and feels right for you, and your family and your children. So there's no right or wrong here. And again, this is really important for me to say. I wouldn't want to push anybody down any kind of avenue with this, right? Everybody's individual experiences are completely different. So there's no straight answer here. But what I would say is that do what feels exactly right for you. And if that means allowing them to continue to have that relationship and build their relationship in their own way, right? You can always say your truth. That's one thing. So when they say, why don't you have a relationship to her? You can say, here's how I experienced it and here's what my truth is. Never, one thing I would say is I don't think you should ever lie to them. I think you should be truthful. This is my experience with them. If your experience with them is that she's nice and you want to keep building that relationship, I'm going to support you in that. This might be one option that you do, but this is my experience and this is why I don't have a relationship. So I think that's quite important in that sense. And then know that it's going to trigger you, right? And there's going to be a bit of you that's like, naturally, there's going to be a bit of you that's a bit like, why the fuck is she like that with my kids? Why? That's all I wanted. I would have taken 1% of that she's doing with your kids, right? I would have taken 1% of that. So why can't she give it to me? All of those feelings and thoughts that you're going to have make perfect sense, and you're very justified in them. So create space for them and allow them, yeah, because that makes sense that you feel that way. Is it normal to grieve? Cutting them off feels like heavy grief. Of course. So what we're dealing with when you've had to cut a toxic parent in this way, we're dealing with living grief, which in some ways, and we should never compare, but in some ways, potentially, is more complex to navigate than normal grief. As in grief of when that relationship ends through a death, it's very definite, clear line, and then you go about making the changes that you need. Living grief, particularly with a toxic parent, right, means that there's no clear line for a start. You're always questioning whether the line should even exist. And then you've got somebody that's combating against that grief that you're feeling, and probably in a number of different ways, right, trying to counter that grief and trying to make you the problem, right, making you question your reality and you feel like you're crazy. So, this is what real gaslighting is that we're talking about here. So it's completely normal to feel it. And this is why we have to, or certainly I, and I hope others as we move forward, talk about this stuff, right? Because when you're experiencing living grief, one thing that you can't do is do it on your own, right? And it's not nice that the only way that you get to, have other people sharing that experience with you is by having to go through the motions of them telling you, have you tried this? And their first thing is to protect the abuser, yeah, or to protect the toxic person and make sure that the toxic person's all right, which is ridiculous. Can you talk about compassion towards our parents? I find huge relief in forgiving them for simply not knowing better, but it hurts to know that they might never change by the age of 70 to 80 years old. Again, this is a really good point. I think rationally, when people talk about the rational stuff, so look, if you've got a toxic and abusive parent, you may be able to look at certain times and go, here's what their upbringing was like, here's what their parents were like, and so it makes perfect sense that they were like this, or it makes sense that they were like this, or, not even perfect sense, but maybe I can understand why they're like this, right? You can do all of that, and that rational stuff might, on certain days and certain times, give you some comfort. And I think it's good to do that, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that you reach back out and make contact with them or change the way that you're interacting with them, but you might be able to find some comfort in that. And coexisting alongside that is the other stuff. Was I not good enough anyway? You know, like, you might be thinking to yourself, I've had this upbringing now with a toxic parent, and I would never do this to my children. So the mixed emotions and all of the things that you feel and think, you're allowed to feel and experience all of them. And this has always been, and this is how I got into talking about this stuff and being more vocal about this stuff, is because we're not always trying to get to this place all of the time. That's not healing, where we go, my parents were horrible and toxic and I had to cut them out, and the healing journey is being able to see them as the love and light that they were born. I don't think it's that. I think healing is being able to understand that I can have mixed emotions, loads of different emotions, feeling them all at the same time, on different days, at different heights and different variations of all of them, and that makes perfect sense based on your experience. So nothing is wrong and nothing is right, but all of them exist. And that's the point, yeah? We often are the only ones who see the poisonous side, so outsiders find it hard to believe. The worst part, not the worst part, I could probably say that about I could probably start off every segment by saying the worst part, but this is the thing about toxic people, yeah? Toxic parents, toxic whatever relation, yeah? They are being one version of themselves when they're with you, right? And a completely different version when they're outside. I've said it before, I'll say it again, they're probably charitable. They're making themselves very likable all of the time, right? They're getting everybody around them to probably, you're there with this toxic parent, right? The mask comes off when the door's shut, and that's when they become that version of themselves that's incredibly toxic. It's all done underhand and done like under the surface, right? So it makes you question your own reality, and it makes you feel you're crazy, and everybody outside saying, you're so lucky to have them as your mum, or you're so lucky to have them as your dad, right? Because they're seeing this version that's presented outside the home, right, and can't believe that they might be like they are behind closed doors. And again, makes it so difficult. It makes it so difficult to be able to talk about. My stepfather passed away a year ago, and I wanted to help my mum out, but she told me that he was not my real dad, and broke my heart. Wow, that's awful experience, awful. My mother started using my daughter to get to me, and then called my daughter a liar. My daughter was 5, and my mother had been running me down to her. Daughter no longer wants anything to do with her. Yeah, see? And so that's where your situation has led you, and it sounds like you did the right thing in allowing that relationship to continue, right? And allowing them to kind of navigate it their own way and being there to kind of support them. And then when it reached a certain level, you made the decision that was right based on the level that you were at, which makes perfect sense to me. And again, look, this is a difficult area to talk about sometimes, potentially, particularly when you put things out online, because what happens is somebody who is a grandparent and has been alienated for no reason from their grandchildren can only see it from that stage, right? So they start coming in and saying, you know, grandparent alienation exists and it's disgusting. And I think it is disgusting if a toxic parent keeps their children away from a grandparent who's not toxic. I think it is disgusting. And these situations exist as well. And so you can't not talk about one situation through fear that it might cause the other people problem situation. You have to say, well, this is the audience that I'm talking to, and so, you know, you can't hold space at every single experience every single time. Are you going to the? I don't even know what that means. Are you going to the woven? I think we have to adjust as we go. We're figuring it out, not failing. That's the key thing, right? Is that you have to navigate it as you're moving through it and do what's right in any given moment. And that's why self-compassion becomes really important. Is this a question here? I find it really hard to accept the way I've let my mother treat me for 37 years. Now I'm struggling to find myself, my job, my hobbies, finding friends. I feel like my own mother has destroyed all of my confidence, and I find it really hard to come to terms with that. Yeah, listen, you won't be alone on that. And that's why, like, a healing process has to begin afterwards, right? And this is the worst, I'm gonna say it again, the worst part. This is another big part that we're talking about, yeah? It's not like there's people running around not in this space, and the audience that I speak to, they're not running around just cutting out their parents and then life just becomes amazing straight away. It's not like that. A person's behaviour is much more likely to be damaging to a child who depends on them. Oh, we're back. Poor connection for a second. A person's behaviour is much more likely to be damaging to a child who depends on them for love and safety than co-workers, neighbours or mates. People will never understand when they experience that person. This is another thing, yeah, because when you're a child, you're constantly trying to attach to your parents. You have no choice. That's how you survive in the world. You have to attach to your parents, right? So it's not until you reach your adulthood and you start to develop that part of yourself that you start to realize this isn't right? You're going to start to realize this isn't right. And then you're going to have to like undo all of the narratives that you would have told yourself, because when you were a child with a toxic parent, you would have blamed yourself. And that self-blame makes sense because your only other option was to look at how the level of toxicity in your parent, right? And then you're alone. So of course you blamed yourself. You had no choice but to blame yourself. And that's why you end up reach a stage in your adulthood where you start unpicking things and you're going to be thinking to yourself, hang on a minute, this wasn't right. This wasn't acceptable. That should never have been like that, right? How do I accept I'll never get an apology from my mum? Even now it's still mine and my dad's fault. Yeah, that's, again, this is why when people say that you should just work towards acceptance, I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. Although you should, working towards it is not a bad thing, working towards acceptance, but it's not as simple as that, is it? It's not as simple as that. Because if you had a toxic parent, all you really wanted was just to be loved in that way, right? You were asking for the bare minimum. How do you stop taking that peacemaker personality trait into other relationships? Yeah, common thing if you've had that level of dysfunction when you were a child is that you're going to be terrified of conflict. You're going to do whatever you can to make sure that you avoid conflict at the expense of yourself. You know, you're going to live a life where most of your adulthood, what you think is, as long as everybody else is around me is all right, then I'm all right, right? You don't even check in with your feelings. What do I want? Is this comfortable for me? What are my needs? You don't do any of that. You've grown up in an environment where make sure everybody else is okay. That's how you developed, and it don't matter about me. That's why you can sit in uncomfortable situations. You'll realize sometimes that, you've sat with a bit of clothing a bit funny, and then you make the adjustment and you go, cool, that's so much more comfortable. I sat uncomfortable for so long there because you're used to that, because you were forced to do it, right? So you've become comfortable with discomfort and feeling uncomfortable and making yourself small, because the only way that you could exist was by making everybody else comfortable and make sure that they're all right. So you're going to be taking that into all of your relationships and the ways that you show up in your adulthood. And so this is why healing in some ways is about stepping into your power eventually, as you can reach there, moving towards a place where you step into your power and you start to go, here's my experience, here's what I think, need and feel. And if you don't like it, you're the one that's got a bit of a problem, not me. Poor connection. Right, I'm going to jump off in a minute because the connection keeps going. My dad always called me the black sheep. He said he was in his family and now I was. He said the reasons was like that was because he was abused. He wasn't. It was a fucked up lie. Yeah, I mean, look, they'll say whatever they need to say to get out of it. I'm going to do this last one and then that's going to be done. How do you tell your emotionally unavailable mum that you love her but you are terrified of her? And that's why you never call. The question is, how do you tell your emotionally unavailable mum that you love her, but you are terrified of her? I think the question is, you're asking me is, how do you get your mum to hear it? And the truth is, if you want me to give the honest answer, I don't think you will. I don't think she will hear it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't say it, because you have every right to say how you think and feel in these relationships, in these situations. So you should say it. And in the end, and this is why it's horrible, in the end, all you can do is start to work on what makes you want to say it. Recognize why you want to hear her. And then, like we talked about earlier with this living grief thing, move through the fact that they're never going to hear it. Some may one day, but you'll never have control over that. So there is no way that you can tell them that you love them, but that you're terrified, because they won't hear it. And fuck, man, that's horrible. That's horrible. And there's so many people that will resonate with that, and also know that the question makes sense because they know they're never going to get them to hear it. And I'm sorry, it's, you know, it's horrible. It's horrible, but you know, I'll continue to talk about it in a truthful way, in that way. And somebody said she might hear it, people change. Yes, she might. And that's why you should maybe say it, but I wouldn't rely on them hearing it. I wouldn't rely on them hearing it. And you certainly have no power over whether they change or not. That's what I believe the truth to be. Which is why, again, like I say, you have every right to say it. I'm going to jump off now. Wow. Really good session. Appreciate it, everybody. As always, you can drop me notes. I'll try and pick up as much as I can in the DMs. I can't get all of them, but take care.